Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Megan and Todd Talk D&D, and today we will be talking about turning monsters and creatures into playable characters. So, Todd, can you tell us a little bit about how we can take some of our learnings from Van Richten's guide to create a gnome squidling?
Yes. So the gnome squidling is something that happened because you and I were tweeting about whether or not mind flayers are, tiny or small if they come from gnomes. Now, gnome mind flayers had existed in particular in Dragonlance at one point, but you did a weird, rough drawing of one that was like walking on its tentacles and had tiny, like little baby feet, and that's how I got around, and so that's how the gnome squidling came about. So the way that you can make a squidling, our baby boy, is a couple of things. The Dampier lineage is actually incredibly flexible in Van Richten's guide. You don't have to necessarily feed off blood. And you can feed off things like psychic energy, cerebral fluid, which is very important here because, this is kind of in the genre of brain juice. And because of that, and all the examples they have of how you maybe became a Dampier, so they mentioned the fact that a Dampier can have a parasite in it. This is very kind of reminiscent of mind flayers themselves. So there's a very fun way we can kind of make this all come together by taking one particular race in D&D, the Dampier lineage, and then a subclass. And we can make a gnome squidling, or we can just make a gnome ceramorph.
Right. Because gnome squidlings like to eat brains,
Right.
I think that eating or feeding off of cerebral spinal fluid kind of transitions nicely into the Dampier lineage.
It certainly makes it, obviously your friends are already on board with you playing a squidling, so let's assume that. And this is how we build it. So we take a regular gnome, maybe a deep gnome, which I think is very flavorful. We take the Dampier lineage and we put it on top of that. From there, we decide to be an aberrant mind sorcerer. So now we have this gnome that feeds off cerebral fluid, that has teeth. Maybe they're not fangs, maybe they're like a sucker mouth.
Or maybe their tendrils have little teeth in them.
Exactly, because you're an aberrant mind sorcerer, maybe for flavor, you have tentacles on your face. Or when you cast spells, which are all very psionically kind of flavored for the aberrant mind, tentacles erupt out of your mouth that maybe that were hidden at the time. So it is a bit of a stretch to become a gnome squidling or a gnome mind flayer, but all the elements are there. A little bit Dampier, gnome, aberrant mind sorcerer. You've got that kind of psionic blast spell that you can use, mind blast. You can detect thoughts as an aberrant mind sorcerer. You can eventually fly even and warp reality around you. So you can have this very kind of charged up, powerful gnome squidling. Because of the Dampier lineage, you make it more of a predator. So like any predator that you've seen in D&D, you can kind of flavor it in that direction by adding the Dampier lineage. And then you also have spider climb, which is really fun and creepy and evocative. Maybe your tentacles are like shooting up into the ceiling and you're hanging off of them, swinging back and forth. It's just a really silly idea.
I think I'm going to use that actually.
Yeah, it's a silly idea. It's certainly not like an optimal build necessarily, right? You're not going to be using your bite a ton, but this is all flavor and in the interest of having fun. This is a very comical character that you probably wouldn't use in Ravenloft itself, but it's something you could take from Van Richten's guide. It shows you how much you can do with these lineages, particularly the Dampier itself.
Yeah, so going back to those lineages, which origin is your favorite when choosing a origin for the gnome squidling? Because there's a lot of options that kind of work well with the gnome squidling that kind of makes sense.
I would imagine the gnome squidlings, and in the books, they're not known to be like insanely smart or bright or whatever, but I feel like Charlatan is probably very smart. So if you kind of are a fan of 3 kobolds in a trench coat, which are also kind of in the book, you, and not in Van Richten's guide, but Icewind Dale, I can imagine you're very adept at appearing to be something else. Maybe you're a gnome squidling in a coat. Maybe you're 3 gnome squidlings in a coat. You're all telepathic. You're all talking to each other secretly and trying to move in conjunction to appear to be a full-size human. So
I love that so much.
So I think the charlatan background would be very advantageous because, frankly, mind flayers are not beloved. Almost in any setting.
But the gnome squidling kind of makes you love them in a weird way.
Yeah, they're ugly cute, as has been discussed, but it doesn't mean that someone's not just going to blast you out of existence when you walk into a tavern. So you being quite adept at hiding your appearance is fun flavor. I mean, if you really want to play like a gnome mind flayer or a gnome squidling, you're buying into this, like, I've got to hide my presence, I have to hide what I am. When you think about how much, Not the Brave is hiding the fact that they're a goblin, they've got a porcelain mask, it's very much part of who that character is, not letting people know what they are. And I think playing a gnome squidling or a ceramorph is certainly a much bigger dive into that genre. But this is how you can get there. The Dampier can be just about anything, with a little bit of creativity, and the lineage works very well with the Aberrant Mind, which also mentions having a parasite inside of you, or some kind of or the changing into a mind flayer perhaps failed for some reason. What do you love about gnome squidlings? Like, what do you enjoy about that?
Well, if I were to play one, I think it would be really fun role-playing as one, because the way that they're described is actually being kind of temperamental, like a cat or a toddler. So I can just see like this gnome squidling meowing at everybody. And then it bites someone because it is a Dompier.
Right.
So it's cute already. It's cute ugly because it's a gnome squidling. But it's also very dependent on everybody it's around. Thanks for joining us today, everybody, on another episode of Megan and Todd Talk D&D, and we'll see you next time.